Congresswoman Hayes, good to see you here on the program today.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
I want to first of all tackle a little controversy that has erupted in recent weeks. I know you've talked about this, and that is that the Waterbury Republican American and the Connecticut Mirror did some stories, and you responded by saying it was clickbait journalism, that some of the facts in those stories were not facts at all, and they were just there to drive viewers to click their websites. What specifically was wrong with those stories in your judgment?
Well, I want to first say that I support journalism. I support the media, and I think that journalists like yourself have a responsibility to ask questions, and I am definitely not aligning myself with some of the conversations that we've heard recently about the media. For me personally, what I did not like about this story is this idea that I was threatened with racist threats. I was never threatened, and my husband's in law enforcement. I know, the time, the energy, the effort and the resources that goes into investigating threats. I mean, I made a comment that there was language that was offensive, and you can see that on social media, even in the same paper on their editorial page, some of the responses. But a threat is serious, and I just wanted to do a hard stop because I didn't want another publication to pick it up and then that become the story. And by the term clickbait, while I recognize that as a representative, I should be answering questions like that, I don't only want to answer questions about, the squad or the president's tweets. I have sponsored 4 pieces of original legislation, co-sponsored 200 pieces of legislation, just came back from the largest bipartisan trip to Israel ever in history. I've done 9 town halls to date and been crisscrossing the district, and it seems like the only thing anyone wants to talk about is a response to some of the things that are not about the work that we're doing.
So just to clarify, because some of the viewers were a little confused by some of the stories and the response. So there was never any racist threat, but you have received emails of a racist tone?
Well, I was never threatened, so that was the part that I really wanted to just put an end. Never, not at all. However, in the interviews, and this is some of the things that I was asked a question in response to the tweet by the president on social media. If you scroll through, there's just a group of people who are always making comments, always bringing it back to race. If you look at, the editorial page in my local paper, if you look at my office, we get calls. I'll take the call and I say, listen, if you want to talk about policy, if you want to disagree with me, that's fine. But I will not let you inject race into this conversation. And I think that happens too often, and the temperature is already too hot in that area. So I didn't want to now add just the criminal aspect of a threat into it. And I guess out of frustration, I was like, enough. My office was not threatened. I was not threatened. Let's take this back down. If we want to disagree on policy or anything else, that's fine. But I think it really does not allow my constituents and the voters to see the totality of the work that we're doing if every conversation centers around race.
And they wanted to see, the reporters wanted to see some of the emails that you received?
They said
of a hostile nature?
Proof that I was, but I mean, that information is already public if you look on the social media. So that's what I was referring to. The Rep and reporter asked me for proof, their own paper in the editorial page, in their comment section. Most of the responses about me are centered around race. And all I was saying, is that I think that journalists have a responsibility to ask questions, to ask tough questions, to get to the bottom of stories. All I was saying was, let's just do a hard stop here. I was not threatened, and let's be more balanced in our approach. Ask those questions, but it just seems like, I'm asked all the time about my colleagues' behavior, about different things. There's so much work that I'm doing in Congress that people aren't even aware of.
Well, let's talk about this. Name some of your top accomplishments since you took office.
Well, my first piece of legislation was H.R. 231 to prohibit the use of federal funds to arm teachers, which was a huge accomplishment for me. We have in the House voted on 2 other pieces of legislation surrounding gun reform, H.R. 8 and H.R. 1112, which addresses universal background checks. So last month when everyone was saying Congress should go back in session, I said no one even is aware that we've already done this. I introduced a Closing the Hunger Gap for college students who don't have access to food and nutrition. The Clean School Bus Bill was just unveiled, and a piece of legislation to assist Gold Star families. I also had 2 amendments that were accepted during the appropriations package. One to address climate action and the sentiment that we should be a part of the Paris climate talks, and the other one was for our Navigator program right here in Connecticut, while money was being appropriated to other states to get people enrolled, I said, Connecticut has already taken control of programs like that. Can we have support for Connecticut? And that was accepted in the appropriations packet.
You know, one reason I think reporters like to ask other members of Congress about the squad and so forth is because the squad has said they are the face of the Democratic Party. We had Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro on here a couple weeks ago. I asked her that question. She said, no, Nancy Pelosi is the face of the Democratic Party. Is that correct?
They are not the face of the Democratic Party. We are not a monolith, you know, and a lot of what people hear, I think, should be encouraging, because the conversations that are happening in caucus are the conversations that are happening in my community. All of these where people are saying, well, this is what my community is saying, and these are the tough questions that people are asking me. So we're already having those robust discussions. But if you look at the vote, you know, the Democratic Party is much more measured, much more centrist. If you look at the way people are voting, so just because you have outliers on both ends, and, you know, I respect my colleagues for that. You know, their district elected them. They knew what they were getting, and that's what they expect. But my district also elected me. So no one speaks for me. And I think we have to come to the middle and remember that the Democratic Party is not a monolith. You know, black women in the Democratic Party are not a monolith. We all have very different ideas, very different backgrounds, and very different approaches to legislation. And quite frankly, it's just exhausting.
Have you made a choice in the presidential race so far?
I did. Kamala Harris.
Senator Harris?
I have come out, yes.
And she's coming here in a couple weeks for some fundraising.
She is.
What about getting her to campaign in the state? Because a lot of candidates come here, they take Connecticut for granted, and they just come, they collect the checks, and they leave. They don't have any public appearances, no rallies, no meet and greets. What can be done to change that?
Unfortunately, I will not be at her fundraiser. I'll be traveling at that time. But you're absolutely right. And I remind people, every vote is important. When I ran, I didn't take any vote for granted. I went into every community, and I worked hard for every single vote. And there were some places where people said to me, you know, that's a small community. You're spending a lot of time there. You know, why don't you go to some of the places that have more concentrated voters? People want to be heard. They want to know that you're working hard for them. And I absolutely have encouraged the senator and will continue to encourage all of the candidates to come so that the people in Connecticut have a real choice and see that their voice is valued and their input is important as well.
Last time I had you on the program several months ago, I asked you if you were in favor of moving toward impeachment of the president, and you said you were not. Has that opinion changed at all, or do you have the same view?
I have the same view. I mean, it's an evolving view. I think that Congress has a responsibility to continue to investigate, to get as much information as we can. I would support an impeachment inquiry, which is just gathering and collecting all of the evidence. I think the thing that people fail to realize is it's not either you're for impeachment or you're against it. We've still been working. You know, we're still issuing subpoenas and calling in witnesses. You know, we just got results back on the Deutsche Bank subpoenas. And I think that's what we need to continue to do, so that if we were to move forward towards impeachment, we would have the strongest possible case.
You were obviously just elected less than a year ago, but you got to think about next year. Are you running for re-election?
I am running for re-election, but I don't take it for granted. I mean, I'm still working really hard, which is why, you know, it's funny, as a teacher, recess has a very different connotation, but my district work period, I have been working hard, just going out and meeting with constituents and meeting with groups and answering those direct questions that people have and showing people and trying to express to them, this is the work that I've done since taking office in January.
Congresswoman Johanna Hayes, we thank you for coming on the program. We'll see you on here again.